This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. We've got some news to get through this week. We don't have an interview or anything, but there's still lots to talk about. And we're going to start with some business news about Paramount, which means I'm just going to toss the baton to my pal Tony to take this one, because as some of you know, I think all this stuff is actually really important and it has impact on Star Trek, but it's just not my wheelhouse for getting into great discussions. So take it away, Tony.
It seems like a deal is coming closer. Paramount is for sale. It now looks like Skydance Media is at the front of the line as a potential buyer. All the stuff with Warner Brothers Discovery seems no one's talking about that anymore. The market didn't like that idea.
Yeah, I didn't like that idea either.
No one liked that idea. This is a much better idea for, I don't know how far you want to get into the weeds, but the idea is that they want to buy the company and take it private, merge Skydance with Paramount as a studio. I think in the end, what they would do is they would sell off CBS. They'd sell off all the cable channels. They'd turn Paramount into a content-focused film and television studio. They don't need the scale of, say, a Comcast or Disney because they have big financing behind them. They have private equity behind them. David Ellison has his father, one of the richest men in the world, Larry Ellison, who's apparently going to pony up some money for this. So, when they need to finance a movie for $200 million, there will be money for that kind of thing lying around, which is important, obviously, because you can't make blockbusters without lots of money.
They could afford all the Chris's.
Yeah, exactly.
They could put every Chris in the Star Trek movie.
So analysts like this deal more, assuming it's a good deal for investors, which is complicated. One of the big questions is, what do they do with the streaming components, which would be Pluto and Paramount Plus? That would have a huge impact on Star Trek. We'll know more in February when they do their latest quarterly results. I'm not expecting them to announce that they've moved to profit yet. They did put out this memo today saying this is the year, the focus on profit year for Paramount Plus, but it doesn't say that they've achieved it. But they're
right. And I would sort of assume that every year is the focus on profit year.
Well, actually, no. I mean, when you are in a growth phase, you can be openly, a couple years ago, you're like, we're growing, we're spending. And the market was responding to that. They're like, no problem, but now the market's like, okay, now it's time to make some money.
Yeah.
So if they could show that there's at least a path to profitability, it's possible Paramount Plus will survive. I still think it's going to be merged or bundled with something else. I mean, but it could just be shut down and all the good content licensed to third parties. Discovery and Strange New Worlds could end up on Amazon or Netflix or who knows.
Right.
Kind of like Prodigy.
It's a good thing I already subscribe to everything.
So I think it would actually be, in the end, a good thing. This deal, it's a much better thing than the Warner Brothers Discovery did not look like a good deal. There are some other bidders looking at Paramount. There's a capital management company that bought just a massive, like $500 billion company called Apollo Capital that owns some other media assets. They would probably also take it private. It could have a similar result in the end. They're kind of a turnaround company that buys what are often called distressed assets and turns them around. Anyway, this is all we know for now. This is the year of a deal, but Paramount is still focused on what they're focused on. They're still announcing new shows and new seasons. That they're not waiting. Some people are saying Paramount's not going to do anything until a deal is done. They can't do that. They have to continue churning out product, greenlighting movies. They just announced another Top Gun movie. They've ordered some new seasons for Paramount Plus this year for non-Star Trek shows and ordered new shows. So they haven't shut down spending. They're just not spending as much as they were. Like 2022 was their year of overspending. And since then,
a lot happened. Lots happened since then.
Yeah. We'll be keeping an eye on it. There's an extended article on the site if you want even more details. This is the year that Star Trek gets yet another owner, probably in a long series of owners, starting with Desilu back in the day.
I wish we could just pool our money and buy it.
Well, but even if we bought it, you'd still need more money to then do something with it. You know, it would take.
Yeah, well, we'd ask that guy's dad. Sorry, this is the depth of my business knowledge. It's just not my topic. Again, not dismissing the importance of it in any way, but only saying it just, the details, the more you get into the details, the more it just, my brain just is like Homer Simpson just thinking of Dancing Girls, like just something else just appears in my head.
But there is David Ellison has, you know, he's the executive producer on 2 Star Trek movies. You know, when Beyond was coming out, he talked about how important it was for them to respect Roddenberry's legacy for the 50th anniversary. This is someone who's Trek aware, you know, and he knows Kurtzman. He in fact tried to get Kurtzman and Orsi back in the day to run the television division for Skydance. So I think this is something that could be good for the franchise in the end. You know, he's not someone who's going to come in and just shut down all of Star Trek.
Right. Or not understand it at all. Yeah.
Exactly. Not that he's going to get into he's got bigger problems than getting into the weeds of green lighting shows and stuff like that.
But an appreciation for the franchise. Yeah.
I think something that I still don't understand why they haven't done is assign someone in Paramount Global to be the, you know, chief creative officer of Star Trek. Or maybe of all their franchises, but probably of Star Trek. I mean, Star Wars has the John Wick franchise has someone like that within Lionsgate. I mean, you just and this would someone who'd look over everything, movies, TV, comics, games, everything, and look at the franchise holistically. It's shocking that since the merger, there still isn't someone with that job.
Yeah, they don't all seem to be connected.
No, they absolutely aren't.
Yeah. Well, let's move into some more practical sort of imminent matters, which is we got a little update on Strange New Worlds production, which is Jordan Canning, who was directing episode 2 of season 3, said that she wrapped earlier this week. She posted on Instagram, had a great time, posted a couple of pictures. So it tells us a little bit about their production schedule.
It looks like they shot one episode after the strikes ended, and they moved pretty quickly to get back into production. They shot one episode in December, and then everyone went on break, you know, including Jess Bush flying home to Australia. And then they
coming back.
And then they flew everyone back, and they started up again in like the second week of January, and now they've wrapped up the second episode.
They're moving along nicely.
Yeah, it takes about 2 weeks to do an episode, so they should be done by May. You know, we still don't know whether they're going to be able to turn it around and get anything out this year. I'd say maybe at best
50-50.
I'm starting to think it's not even that, but yeah, maybe
we'll see. And then the Section 31 movie starts shooting next week, so things are in general.
There is something we haven't confirmed yet, but it looks like the Academy show could start pre-production at least in March, which would make sense for them to start up after Strange New Worlds wraps up. Because as I said before, they're not going to do all 3 at the same time. Right. That's just crazy. But I think once one or both of the Section 31 movie and the Strange New Worlds season 3 are done, they'll be ready to start on Academy. Right. Which means no matter what, that's 2025 at the earliest.
Yeah.
But probably 2025, because even if they start in shooting in the summer, they could get it into 2025.
Yeah, I don't mind waiting for a new show. It's only waiting between seasons that drives me crazy.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the strikes lasted for 5 months. It's just gonna have an impact. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, of course. We have some awards nominations coming up. Sort of technical, specific craft awards coming up for sound editing and visual effects. So the Golden Reel Award, which is a sound editing award, Picard has been nominated for The Last Generation. And in the sound editing animation category, Lower Decks has been nominated for Old Friends, New Planets.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that these shows have been nominated. I think both of them have been nominated before for these. You know, this is the kind of stuff that Trek usually gets, right? I think you were about to mention the Visual Effects Society,
Yep.
which actually recently Trek has not been getting these nominations. So this is good. They're back on their radar. This is for creative environments, which is basically the volume.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of the main ship battle visual effects. There's so much competition.
For the broken circle. Yeah, there's a lot more of those kinds of shows on the air now.
I mean, back in the day, Trek won almost every year back in the 90s because there,
what else was there?
Like Babylon, Babylon 5, and stuff. I mean, no offense to Babylon 5, but Star Trek was spending the most money on visual effects back in the 90s. And now everyone is spending a ton on visual effects.
Right. I mean, Star Trek didn't get any wins at the Critics' Choice Awards, but the Saturn Awards are coming up in February, and there's like 15 nominations for all the different for Picard, Lower Decks, and Strange New Worlds. And Strange New Worlds has been nominated by the American Society of Cinematographers also.
I mean, it's rare to get the Critics' Choice nomination. Anson and Rebecca and
Celia.
Yeah, they all went. They all looked great, and they acknowledged that they did like some of those Entertainment Tonight red carpet things. And they're like, look, shows like this usually don't get the nomination.
Yeah. So no, it's nice to see them at a non-genre specific ceremony.
I mean, they took time out from shooting Strange New Worlds to fly down to LA for the awards, so that was a big deal. Yep,
that's actually the reason that Celia couldn't do Trek Talks this year, which is my segue into the Star Trek Picard Trek Talks panel. And it's true, so there you go. I don't know if all of you watched Trek Talks. I hope you did. You still can if you didn't. But there was an amazing Star Trek Picard panel co-hosted by Jonathan Del Arco and our own pal, Kayla Iacovino.
It was the longest panel of the day, right?
Yes. It was a full hour. It had the most people in it of any of the other ones. It was so much fun to watch and just see them all go. I thought it went really well. And one of the things they talked, Terry Metalis, there's a lot of praise for Terry during that panel.
A lot. Yeah. It was a Terry love fest. It was, I loved it, but there was that moment where I think Kayla was talking about how it was too dark, and
yeah, it's a good question, I thought.
Yeah. And Terry essentially was saying, lessons learned. He pointed out how when you look at it in their wonderful monitors on set, it looks great.
Sure.
Maybe, but streaming on a normal TV, it doesn't. And sometimes Paramount Plus would release it using weird stuff, and it would be even worse. And so then he just was talking about this, and he said, if we had to do it again, or if next time or something like that. And Del Arco's like, wait. What do you mean if you get another shot? So he thought that Terry was talking about the spinoff Legacy as if it was happening. And Terry had to say, well, it's not really happening.
Yeah, there's nothing in development right now, even though everybody wants to do it who worked on it, of course.
Yeah, they were all there and they were all, excited to do it. It's not happening. It's not in development. But he then immediately started talking about how he was just talking to Dorn about ideas for the show. It's like he can't help, and I've talked to him about this in the past. In his mind, he just thinks of his brain is in the 25th century, and he's thinking, what's happening, and he was talking to Dorn about it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and he was wondering what the Klingon Empire is like. I feel like he talked to us about that possibly on our podcast. Yeah. When he was there too. But talking about where's the Klingon Empire? What's going on with them? What does that mean for Worf? What does that mean for Alexander? Those are all good questions. I mean, I love that he's still thinking about it.
Yeah, and he noted how Spock, Leonard Nimoy, that character lived.
I think it was Todd Stashwick who noted that.
Well, yeah, but first, Metalis said, these characters, you never say goodbye to them, which was his little bit of hope that even though nothing's in development, maybe someday. But then, yeah, Todd's like, speaking of Spock.
Yeah, Spock came back to life. So, I'm sure they'd find a way.
I can't imagine them not finding a way to use him. I'm not sure he'd be a series regular, but he'd show up. They'd figure out a way for sure.
Somehow.
Yeah.
There's always a way. In soap operas and Star Trek, there's always a way.
Speaking of Star Trek Legacy. Michelle Hurd was at the 25th anniversary event for SVU. For SVU fans, you may remember she was on that show.
She was great on that show, by the way.
And she got out, because I mean, that's a funny thing. Like, you're on the red carpet for SVU and she gets asked about Star Trek Legacy, a show that's not happening technically, but Hollywood journalists want to know. And I mean, what she said is, fingers crossed. She goes through like, oh, well, they're going to do Section 31 and then they're going to do Academy. And then if fans want it, they're going to do Legacy. Almost as if it's a fait accompli, that Legacy is going to happen. I think she oversold it a little bit there.
Well, I think she also wasn't making the statement as someone who's running the franchise. She was just making the statement as, an actress with her perspective on it. But I don't think she was claiming to have inside information.
I mean, it's certainly on the table back in the offices, but she kind of made it seem like, oh, well, if fans want it, they'll just do this next. And since fans obviously want it, then they will do this next. And I just don't think it's that simple. I think probably something has to go for it to be another series.
Right.
They've got Strange New Worlds and Academy. I just don't see them doing 3 live action series concurrently.
Yeah, I just don't think she was speaking from a business perspective. I think she was, she was asked on the red carpet. That's not a place for those kinds of conversations.
Right. I mean, it isn't
So she's saying if the fans want it, they'll do it.
Right. And the obvious response from most fans to this article and online of it, well, duh, we want it. Yeah.
Of course we want it.
There are people, and I get this perspective, says we don't want more old Trek and bringing back old we want a brand new show with a brand new cast. Now, Metalis would say you can get both, so we could do a new show that focuses on a new young cast, but also brings in all of these people once in a while. And I think that is the right way to do it.
I mean, maybe what made some people nervous, and this came up in the Picard panel too, is like Terry said, the ending was not a setup. It was a real ending and it's a passing of the torch. But when you throw that scene with Q in at the end, I mean, first of all, it did feel like a setup. It just felt like a setup for another show. Yeah. But when you throw Q in, you are already now making that connection and tying it back. And that was why I didn't love that, because it didn't feel like a new adventure. It felt like, oh, the same old adventure, right? Like, let's revisit. So I think that's the way that some people are thinking, is like, yeah, I don't want to keep having references and legacy and going back and visiting old people that we already know. I personally would be very thrilled with the Legacy show, but it's not like I can't understand some of the hesitation. Should we move on to Star Trek Discovery?
I mean, it is the next big thing, right? That we're going to see for live action Star Trek, any Star Trek, right?
Yeah, new Star Trek. You can keep rewatching the old ones. I can't speak to what everybody's going to see, but I can speak to new Star Trek. So, how do you say his name? Elias Toufexis? Is that his? Yeah. So he was interviewed by Trek Culture on YouTube. He's playing one of the 2 antagonists this season on Discovery. One of the 2 aliens, this Bonnie and Clyde type couple who are chasing the same thing that the disco people are chasing. He's a big Star Trek fan, and he appeared very briefly in season 1, and he thought that was going to be it. And he was very sad and then thrilled to get the call to show up for season 5. So, and he revealed some stuff that I'm sure he got in trouble for later.
Oh, there is no doubt that he got a phone call from someone saying, "Oh, dude," So he's not doing any more interviews. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Until they do the official rollout, which will start in March and April. I mean, but then again, I'm not sure there was anything crazy that he said. He talked about how his character, which, how many times have we heard this before? He's not just a villain, he's not just a bad guy.
Right.
He's nuanced. He's got his own motivations, his own reasons. But it doesn't sound like it's, a cliched revenge thing. He's a criminal, and it's a love story with him, who plays Locke, this alien, and Ball. And they have, that they're after the same thing that the Discovery and Federation people are after for their own reasons. and they just want to be left alone.
The big thing he said that people got excited about is that there are lots of callbacks to previous Star Trek shows in the season 5 storyline of Discovery. And something has to do specifically with his character. He said, what my character turns out to be is huge for Star Trek. And then he was like, oh, I can't get into the specifics.
Because he isn't an obvious, when you look at the pictures, he's not a clear alien where you go, oh, that it's this or that. He kind of looks a little bit like a Kelpian. There's some other Star Trek and Babylon 5 aliens. He looks a little bit. I suspect it's some kind of interesting hybrid, perhaps.
Yeah.
You remember they had the Cardassian president who's like part Cardassian and part
Bajoran
and part human. And
yeah,
all sorts of things. I mean, my favorite crazy theory, which wasn't a real theory, was that he's some like deep descendant of the Janeway and Paris lizard babies.
I saw that. That's my favorite also.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I would give them such huge props if they kind of turned that into a real thing, you know, and it made logical sense how they evolved and they got smarter, whatever. It's not that, but God, that would be so cool if it was.
I know, that would be so much fun. That's the right time for a callback.
It's so clear this guy is a real fan. I mean, he talked about how Discovery has changed over the years. And what's interesting is he said, like, last season was the kind of Star Trek The Motion Picture style season where it was slower and quieter and had this big kind of entity thing to deal with and the science plot. And they are going in the other direction, as he described it this season. He wasn't saying that was bad. He's just saying they're pivoting to this more fun adventure stuff this season. And he picked up on what Michelle Paradise said at that recent convention in Brazil of how it's more episodic. And he said, yeah, there's like whole episodes that aren't really about the big plot. They're more...
Yeah, he said there were a couple of standalones that he's not even in.
Right, or he shows up just at the end so that they could bridge to the next episode, because he's part of the big arc of this big hunt. He even said maybe, I think he's guessing here, but that they looked at Strange New Worlds and they kind of liked some of what they saw of how they're switching things up episode by episode
and having a little more fun, I think.
Yeah, so it's worth checking out. His enthusiasm is infectious. It's great that, I mean, he's a real fan. He made his own like fan films when he was a kid. I mean, this is a genuine.
He's a fun follow on Twitter, by the way. Yeah.
He's not one of those people who says he's a fan because he's a fan. He's Stashwick level fan.
Yep.
So that's great. They called him back for another season.
Yeah, I like that. Plus, I feel like that's a nice Star Trek tradition anyway. Reusing your guest stars. Yep.
You wouldn't recognize him, because he's under so much makeup. The other Discovery thing comes from Trek Talks. The closer was Doug Jones. He didn't, because Doug is careful about stuff, but he did talk a little bit about the finale. And I thought what was interesting is he talked about, the additional shooting. We've heard this referred to as reshoots, but it's clearer now that they didn't reshoot anything. The way he described it is the finale, they didn't change anything, but they added something.
An epilogue.
Which, he described it as an epilogue, which he is part of. Like, for example, Elias said, he had nothing to do with with this epilogue. So his stuff was done.
Oh, and Doug said he got emotional. He said he went in to do some additional dialogue and he asked them to show it to him because he hadn't seen it. And then he cried. He's such a sweetie.
I mean, how would he not cry? But it does sound like it's emotional, whatever it is, this epilogue. I
mean, that's also one of the hallmarks of the show. But it makes sense. He's such a sweetie. Like, I loved in that panel when Jessica asked him what he would like his legacy to be. And he said that he'd been thinking about that lately and that he would like to be known as the guy who gave hugs, who gave good hugs. It's like, love him.
I've gotten a hug from Doug Jones. I think you have.
I have. He's a good hugger.
Everyone. Yeah. I don't know if he still does it like with fans at conventions because of COVID.
I think he does.
He does?
I think he still does. I suspect he still does.
Amazing.
Anyway, separate from that, he mentioned that he asked Michelle Paradise at the beginning of the season when they just started filming, like, is the Saru-Tarina romance going to continue? And she said, I think you'll be very pleased. So that would be a yes.
I mean, last week, our last podcast, we talked a little bit about the season 1 description, which talked about how Saru gets some kind of offer, some big offer.
Oh, not season 1, episode 1 of the new season.
Right, exactly. And I mean, maybe it has something to do with her, and it's maybe
it's an offer to go to Vulcan or something. Nivar.
Yeah. I like that. Could just be
interesting
that they're gonna, she offers to marry him.
Maybe
we'll get an alien wedding,
and then a weird looking baby. All right, we've got the spinoff all figured out.
Exactly.
Talk about passing the torch.
Aw.
All right, well, we have more fun stuff from Trek Talks, which I'm just going to throw in, by the way, has raised in total so far, the last time I looked, because they're still taking donations, $110,000.
A good chunk of which was from Rod Roddenberry. He did a $50,000 matching donation, right?
Yes, he did. He said, once you get to 50, I will match it, which is incredible and very generous. And he did that. But just saying, if you wanted to donate, you could just go to givebutter.com/TrekTalks3. Just throwing that in there as an option. And definitely you can still go watch all the panels because they're really great. So one of the ones I thought was terrific was moderated by you.
Indeed. I was given the producing Star Trek panel, which was with Aaron Watke and the Hageman brothers from Prodigy and Brannon Braga from, TNG,
everything.
Voyager. So in the end, it was, ended up to be a lot about Voyager and Prodigy because of who was there. It was fun watching because they had never met.
I know that was so cool that they had never met him until that panel. And they started by complimenting him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't always get that. I mean, fans get mixed with it. I think he's still sensitive about a lot of the negative comments that he used to get. And so that was a really lovely moment because they were so genuine and so appreciative. And then he had watched Prodigy.
And he really, I think he was genuinely touched. I don't know, but he liked what they've done with the Janeway character.
Yeah.
And how they're carrying on, the legacy of Voyager, even though the Hagemans wanted to make it clear, that they're not, this isn't Voyager season 8. There's other stuff coming in season 2 that has, even though the Doctor's coming out. So they got the Doctor and Chakotay and Janeway and another Janeway. But they're promising there's non-Voyager things coming in season 2.
And they talked about broadly just bringing in legacy characters because Brannon was like, look, we brought in Spock and Scotty and Sulu. We brought, we came close to getting Kirk on Enterprise and talked about saying the big challenge is just making sure the story is right. And there's a good reason to bring the character back, and admitted that he felt like unification on TNG was, I think he said it was a little drab.
Yeah, he questioned whether it was worthy of Leonard Nimoy and Spock. And I think there was an argument for that because you only want to bring in a legacy character for a good reason, not just to have them show up, which is something we talked about over and over again as we were reviewing Picard, where in almost every case there was a good reason. Moriarty, not a good reason,
Right. Yep.
Just Terry just wanted to do it, and that because that season shows you how to do it right and how to do it wrong, I would say. And Janeway, I think the Hageman said there was never any discussion.
Yeah,
it's going to be Janeway because who else? There's no one else that could, because they knew they wanted a legacy character to help bridge the gap, and she's just so perfect for what they wanted to do, which Brandon agreed with.
Yeah, and mentioned that she has maternal qualities, which she always did.
I mean, I really like what they, hologram Janeway. The great thing about that character was that she was Captain Janeway, especially early season Captain Janeway, but kind of grew to be her own thing as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
A third Janeway, essentially, and then the Admiral Janeway character is a logical evolution of the Janeway we knew from Voyager.
Right, who made it all the way back and had all kinds of stuff happen. And you tried to get them to talk about Janeway and Chakotay. Brannon didn't spill anything about what they were thinking of back in the day. The Hagemans talked about how careful they've been, just in terms of even how they think about that relationship. They know that it's a big deal. They said they called in consultants. So it's interesting. Right. Like, I would not be happy if they show up and throw themselves into each other's arms and start making out. Like, I don't want, lots of people do want that. I don't.
I have faith in whatever they're going to do, but they've clearly put a lot of thought into it.
Which is why we have so much faith in it.
They clearly also put a lot of thought into how they were on Voyager, because they talked about that, and they also talked about how, noting how Brannon was handcuffed, as they described it, due to the non-serialized nature of Voyager in developing that kind of stuff.
Well, that didn't stop Tom and B'Elanna.
Yeah, that's true. When I remember when I did a rewatch of Voyager a few years ago, I'm like, this is more serialized than one remembers.
There's the Doctor had tremendous growth and change. B'Elanna and Tom had all this growth. I think there was some for Harry, maybe everybody, and Janeway seemed to bear the weight of the burden of the whole thing. But I do think there was character serialization in that show.
It's easy to point out, there's just other things like, too many shuttles, too many torpedoes.
They ran out of torpedoes and somehow got fresh ones. They had way more than they started with. Yeah.
Yeah. And the ship just, it should have gotten more beaten up as they moved along,
Yeah, it seemed to be repairing itself.
Yeah. Which they could have explained easily. Yeah. I think that show does have a good amount of character serialization, which is now kind of the in vogue thing. When you look at Strange New Worlds, it's all, they say it's not serialized. It's extremely serialized.
Yeah, very much so.
Just it's really the characters that are serialized, but the plots aren't as much.
Right. We still don't know when season 2 is coming on Netflix, but it's not going to be in February.
And when Netflix has announced some things for March and April, and it's not on those lists either, but they haven't released comprehensive lists. So I still have no idea. My best guess is, I hate to say it, but I think they're going to drop it in April, which means we're going to end up with, all sorts of Star Trek in April. But
yeah,
maybe I'm just worried about that. And that's why I think it's going to happen.
It's always feast or famine, right?
Yeah. There was a lot. We've talked about a few panels at Trek Talks, but there were so many good panels that just weren't newsy, but just were fun discussions. And it really is worth checking them out. Watching them all at one sit down may be difficult because it is a total of 6 hours. How many hours?
8.
8 hours. Jesus. So
it was a long and wonderful day. So, the one I recommend to everybody is the Tuvix panel, which was like a fantasy panel for me. It was the panel I've dreamed of since I knew panels existed. So Tom Wright, Ethan Phillips, Tim Russ, Lisa Klink, who didn't write the episode but was in the writer's room, Robbie and Garrett moderated. The funniest thing to me was that they basically were still arguing over Janeway's decision. It's all these years later. They have a lively debate about whether she did the right thing or not. And then every comment on our story about it is the same debate. It's a never ending debate.
It is.
I love it.
The ultimate, the sides were Tim Russ had a non-ironically logical point of view, right? And it wasn't just arguing for his own character, but, why Janeway did what she did because she's the captain. She has to make this essentially the needs of the many argument. And Robbie's point of view, which I thought was interesting, even though I don't necessarily agree with, is he thought it hurt the Janeway character as a story, looking at it as a storyteller, that fans watching the show would feel, not like her essentially because of the decision. And some didn't. Yeah. Because she's, the Janeway is a murderer, and he really doubled down. He's like, why didn't they could have done a science thing to get out of it. They could have had Tuvix sacrifice himself.
Yeah, Lisa Klink was like, We considered that, she admitted, but she said, like, it's much more interesting to force Janeway to decide. That's really what the story is. And she said, and torture your characters as much as possible. But she's right. Like, that is what makes it, that's what, Janeway's Janeway, and she has to make these calls. And that's what makes the show, she's out in the middle of nowhere. She's got no one to help her, and she had to make a decision. And I think it was funny that Tom Wright, who played Tuvix, was like, yeah, Janeway made the right call.
Yeah. One reason why I think Robbie is partially right is that it kind of seems out of character. Perhaps it depends on how you view Janeway, but it's just such a harsh and cold thing. Like if it was a show like Battlestar Galactica, you could see Adama making a call like this and you almost wouldn't think about it, the next week, because that's the kind of guy he was. He made those hard decisions, and, they had a new crisis to deal with the next week. And this is the thing about Voyager, perhaps, is like, Year of Hell should have been a year-long season, that we should have seen more of these gray area, hard-hitting, dark elements on the show. And we didn't. And so when one pops up every once in a while, you're like, whoa, that's kind of dark. She killed that guy, and that look on her face and everything. I mean, it's shocking. So I could see that, and my only argument is I wish she killed more people. I wanted, let's delve into the dark. I mean, you got to do you're stuck in the Delta Quadrant. You got to make some tough calls.
Well, they did. She did make a lot of tough calls.
True enough, but I want to see more. I want to see more gray area, more darkness.
I think she did have a lot of those moments where she was wrestling with things and she had to make, ultimately it's her decision to make. I did think it was funny. Garrett had a theory that he just wanted all three. He thought there was a way to keep them all.
I mean, that's what I mean. It's sweet, but come on, get off the fence, Garrett.
Yeah. Well, it's because he just loved Tom Wright so much. He had such a strong reaction to him. So I thought that was really nice. And I think it was nice for Tom Wright because he said he hadn't done any conventions before. He's never done anything like that. So, and Garrett was like, I'll hook you up. Don't worry. But it would be great to see him at conventions. And he still thinks about the episode. He understands it has such a big impact. So, let's get him. I think that's so cool. That was, I think, for me, like such a highlight.
Yeah, there's more in there. Lisa Klink talks about the original pitch and how it changed and stuff. So,
oh yeah, that stuff was great.
I think it's just great that you guys did a whole thing on just one episode because it's such a way to deep dive into it.
It's so funny. Like they'd done that a couple of years back. They did The Visitor from Deep Space Nine. And then when it came up again to do an episode, we have a Slack and everybody was just like Tuvix. Everybody said Tuvix. I make a list of like, here's 10 different episodes we could do. And everyone's like, Tuvix. So, and then the minute we got Tom Wright, it like turned into, oh my God, something else. And then we really tried to get Ken Biller because I'm going to toot my own horn. I was pushing, like we need the writer. And then when Ken couldn't work out the timing, I figured Lisa was in the room, which she was, and that was great. And then I brought up, I was like, what if Garrett moderated? Because I remembered him telling me in an interview for Trek Movie how much he loved Tom Wright. Like he was nuts for him. And then John Billingsley, once he was asking Garrett, he just asked, he got them both. And he just basically told them they were doing it.
So what's let's think about 2025. Maybe some of our listeners can post on the article for this what they would like to see. But what's another single episode panel that would be a fun one to do? I mean, Threshold, of course. I mean, you can go in the other direction. Doesn't have to be Voyager. I'd love to see a Measure of the Man.
I feel like we're overdue for some Deep Space Nine love, know?
And there's so many choices there. And in that case, you may want to do like an arc because so often those, they had those multi-part episodes. But there are some great standalones in there.
There are great standalones that you could do. Yeah, I mean, there's so many options. Like the list I made was also based on like people I thought we could get.
Right. That's obviously,
so that's
some original series ones you'd want to do, but it's
right.
There's difficulties there for obvious reasons.
Right.
Well, speaking of single episode panels, there was another one moderated by a certain Laurie Ulster.
A certain very nervous person.
Focused on a much more recent episode, Those Old Scientists.
Yeah, that was so much fun. We got Jonathan Frakes, Tawny Newsome, and the co-writers Bill Wolkoff and Catherine Lynn, who were great. You could tell how much fun they had making this episode, and they made it clear that, yeah, they had a blast. I mean, I think the big takeaway is like, they were never held back. Nobody was worried it was getting too funny or too silly. And once Daly started showing up, they were just told, like, do more. Keep doing what you're doing and increase it.
Which, of course, all of them pointed out, especially Frakes, like, that is just so weird on a Star Trek show.
Yes.
Because you're never allowed to break. That there are guardrails, and that there's the script, and there's certain things you do with the camera. And he was doing some weird shit in that episode, and they let him do it. The weird POV cam and the cartoony stuff. Yeah, it was fun to watch them talk about all of that. And we didn't see this on the DVDs, but there are some outtakes. Apparently, Tawny said she got a little raunchy talking about Hot Spock.
Yeah,
so.
She said, like, saying terrible things about my friend to my friend. So, and apparently there's some good stuff with her and Rebecca in the hallway, in the corridor, and some stuff with Boimler, like just poking around Pike's office. Like Jonathan Frakes said, he kept everything in his cut, but there were outtakes. Because I was like, did you film anything that you didn't use? And he basically used everything except the outtakes.
Right, but those are more, alternate takes of the same scene. There aren't whole scenes. Catherine Lynn said that they had a bit in there in the script that they never shot about a Sailot. I guess, I don't know if they were going to talk about Spock's Sailot or some Sailot, but apparently the writers are trying to get a Sailot into the show.
I love that.
It doesn't need to be this episode, so my bet is they're gonna do it eventually.
They'll find a way for sure. And then I did ask Frakes, has anyone talked about doing another one? Because Mike McMahon, we know, has said he wants to, and he said ever since we wrapped.
Which I think was joking but serious.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Like, that they definitely would like to do another one. I don't think they're going to do it haphazardly. I think if they could have the right idea, that they would do it.
Don't see it happening in season 3. It's just too soon to do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting to just do it the other way, where you do it on Lower Decks, where there's a Lower Decks episode where there's a little bit of live action within the episode. Like, they go in the holodeck and suddenly it all turns to live action and Pike shows up. But, you could have Michael Burnham show up. I mean, they could do some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
In the holodeck, but it's all live action. They all talk about, like, why does everything look 3-dimensional and all that.
Right.
Like the Homer, the famous Homer Simpson when they. It's like, ooh.
I always loved that.
Yeah.
Then he got scared.
Right. My favorite bit is when he talks about how expensive it is, and then he just sits there. Anyway, sorry, we are talking about the wrong show.
I know. I'm going to put a link to that on the post so that people can watch it, because it's just a joy.
Yeah. Hopefully people have an idea of what we are talking about. We are old, because that is from a long time ago.
I know. When
CGI, well, it's still expensive, but the CGI on that doesn't look expensive, but it was at the time.
It was expensive. Yep.
What other must-watch panels do you think there are from Trek Talks?
The big one for me was the Sci-Fi Sisters panel, which was about the legacy of women in Trek. So they had Michelle Hurd, they had Marion Smothers, who's Nichelle Nichols' sister. They had Adele Simmons, who was an AD on every season of Next Generation and a couple of seasons of Voyager, who had incredible stories. Dawn Lewis. And they all had really compelling things to say. Dawn Lewis actually made me emotional when she was talking about, like, getting Star Trek and what it meant to her. And she was friends with Nichelle Nichols. But there's so much. And the Adele Simmons stories I thought were amazing. Like, the crap that she had to put up with. So just like just when she started out, as a trainee how does your husband feel about you having a job was one of the questions. So, and she talked about how Patrick Stewart really always stood up for her. And I don't know, it was just, I think to me, that was a really compelling, emotional panel and joyful too.
Yeah, where she talked about how, she's the only woman of color, only person of color on the set.
Yeah, like she goes, I think there was one electrician.
I mean,
and then she also talked about how there were, I think she said 10 female ADs and then, or 10 black female ADs. I wish I could remember the exact stat, but then a few years later there were 8. Like it went down.
She meant in all of Hollywood.
Yes.
Not Star Trek.
Not on Star Trek. Yeah.
Yeah. In Los Angeles. So
she's
that's
fascinating.
Crazy, great. But she did note how it's changed in a big way in the last few years.
Yeah, she talked about, she said, when I had that stat, she said, there still hadn't been Me Too. There was no Shonda Rhimes out there running all these shows. So a different era. But I think that's a great panel and really good conversations with Nana and Ken Biller. There's all kinds of good stuff to be watched in there.
I like the Ken Biller one. I mean, anything with the writer-producer, I'm always fascinated to watch.
Yeah.
I think that's basically it for newsy stuff and for Trek Talk stuff. Last week we talked about a announcement that a new season of Star Trek Online coming out. That's now out. You could watch the trailer and see screenshots. And I did a separate article all about the recreation of Battle Wolf 359, which is really cool. I got to get an early preview of that. And it's just fun that they're doing these kinds of things in the game. And it's really interesting how they, because they get access to the assets from Paramount, like the audio track. So they weave in Locutus stuff and Admiral Hansen stuff, and then they add new stuff to it. So you really feel like you're in the Battle of Wolf 359. And they've done this before with the Battle of the Binary Stars too. So it's pretty cool. And that's it for the week, right?
Well, let's do our bits of the week because we have time to do it. So Tony, what you got?
Mine, this just tickled the hell out of me. A guy I know from online is this big Star Trek fan. He's Danish. His name is Johan Albrechtsson. And so when someone comes through doing a junket and he knows there's a Star Trek connection to them, he puts it into his interview. So he was interviewing Paul Giamatti, who's in this great movie, which
The Holdovers.
Yeah, just fantastic. It's been nominated for an Academy Award. He's been nominated for Best Actor. But he got Paul Giamatti to talk about how Giamatti has previously said he wants to play Klingon. He's a huge sci-fi nerd, Giamatti, and Star Trek fan. And he got Giamatti to recreate that scene from the movie Sideways, where he talks about how he won't drink any fucking Merlot, but he did it in Klingon. And then the guy edited it into
he did such a nice
scene
job.
where there's it's a scene from Next Generation and there's Giamatti as a Klingon captain, and it's just really well done. But here we have Paramount, there's this guy's could quite possibly win the Academy Award for Best Actor. But I know you got the last year's Best Actress in Star Trek, so why not go for this year's Best Actor? He even said on Colbert, if not a Klingon, one of those blue guys, and he kind of made the antenna. So I think, so Andorian. So Paramount, put Paul Giamatti in Star Trek. He'll do anything.
Yes. Don't waste the opportunity. All right. Well, mine is not that. It's something different, which is that someone posted this on Twitter. So there are a lot of really dopey Star Trek quizzes out there, and you can usually predict how they're going to go. But this is a new one. And it's called, which Star Trek character do you need a hug from? And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to fill that out. And I filled it out, and I got the best. I got Benjamin Sisko. And it said, dad hug, dad hug, dad hug. Sisko will give you the warmest, most comforting hug of your goddamn life. You will feel so safe and at peace. He will also make you some soup or something, which is exactly the kind of hug I wanted at that moment and generally kind of like. And then everybody else that I saw taking it thought that the hug that the person they got was spot on. And there was quite the range. It was like, I saw people get Tilly, Data, Troy. There were a lot of different ones. So we're going to put up a link to it, but I suggest that you go and see which Star Trek character would give you a hug, because whoever put this quiz together knew what they were doing.
I'm going to have to do this. And it's such an interesting idea.
Someone else got Tuvok and said that tracks. Like, everybody, the description just, I didn't see one person saying, oh, that's not a good match. And I do love a big comforting, like everything's going to be okay hug.
I don't know who I want to hug from. I have to think about it before I take the quiz, right?
Well, it's a lot of quiz. So you just answer the questions and then see if when you read it, you go, yeah, that rings true. That is the kind of hug that I would like. I highly recommend it.
Well, I'll let you know next time. Who's my Star Trek hug?
Yeah, I need to know. All right, well, that's it for this week on All Access Star Trek. Do us a favor, please go give us a review on Apple. We'd really appreciate it. If you like us. If you don't like us, don't.
Exactly.
All right, bye.
Goodbye.